We tackle your questions as the Bucks prepare for their first round series against the Indiana Pacers, and we did get an update on the status of Damian Lillard, so we dig into that coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined by both Camille Davis and Frank Madden. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for checking out the Locked On Bucks newsletter. If you have not done so yet, you can still sign up for free at lockedondaily.com. A lot to dig into as we get ready for this first round series. We mentioned quite a bit of listener questions that we have to sift through here in this show, but I suppose we should start with the update of sorts on Damian Lillard that was provided earlier today. They are very optimistic about the status they have seen, but Dame will miss the start of the postseason. So whether that's games 1 and 2, whether that's the first round in itself, who knows? But I don't suppose either of you are surprised by this.
I know I'm not. I'm not surprised. I kind of was going into it. We've talked about it of just expecting him not to be there. And if he does, then hey, it's a positive coming from that. But all in all, I think it is good news just to hear that he's progressing well, knowing that it's a blood clot, hearing the team called it early, that he's doing well. That's of the utmost importance. But I'm still not really banking on Damian Lillard to be back in the first round. If he is, beautiful. But I think they're going to have to kind of prepare for it without him.
Yeah, I was listening to the Dunked On guys, and Nate was talking about how like the fastest timeline he's heard for this sort of injury was like 4 to 6 weeks. Yeah, 4 to 6. And so, if you kind of work back the timeline from, I think like March 26th or something like that was roughly when it was announced, but it sounded like he had potentially been on already had started treatment like a week before it was officially announced. So if you go back from March 19th and, spin forward 4 weeks at the very best, you'd be talking about basically like this weekend. And that's obviously kind of like would have been like the most optimistic scenario. So, yeah, I mean, 4 weeks this weekend, 6 weeks would have been second round, so I don't
a game
know.
6 or 7 somewhere along
yeah,
there.
something, right? So I don't know, this tells us a whole lot other than just confirming, I think our collective assumption, which is plan to not see him in the first round. And if you do see him, then it's kind of a bonus. And, I think, I can't remember. I know I've podcasted with both of you. I can't remember if I was talking with you, Justin, or you, Camille, about like the psychological component of this. And I think it works on a couple levels. I think, honestly, for the Bucks and for Bucks fans, it's like not ruling him out and not being overly conservative, just saying like, oh, he's done. I think there's a component of that, like just in terms of making sure the kind of vibes don't get too negative. And I think for the team, it's sort of like, hey, we just gotta keep doing our jobs, and we think we'll get Dame back, right? I think that was probably part of the thinking around why they sort of strung out the Giannis stuff a year ago, even though ultimately it appeared he was never really particularly close to coming back. So I think there's that piece of it from the Bucks side. Also, if the Pacers are at all thinking about having to game plan for Damian Lillard right now, that means that they're having to think about more things than probably they need to. Yeah. So again, are they building their game plan around having to stop Damian Lillard? Surely not. But it does give them also like one other thing that they need to, or maybe they don't need to, but like potentially are thinking about in terms of eventualities that they might be spending some time thinking about. So, so again, how strategic is this? I don't know, but obviously we'll just cross our fingers and hope that at some point maybe we him. But I think the other part too is, guys, like I don't think it's going to be easy after playing without him for a month to just
reintegrate,
throw Dame back in when you only sort of started to, kind of figure out your rotations and what it's like to play without him. Again, not to be confused with like you're better without him, because we know the ceiling of this team cannot be reached without Dame. But to just throw him in with who knows what his conditioning will be. He's obviously been able to do some stuff now, but it's really tough. And even if he was coming back, for game one, I think that would have put the Bucks in, much tougher spot than if he had obviously just been playing. So not ideal on a number of fronts. I'll continue to be the Debbie Downer in that regard. But we'll see. I mean, I'm trying to kind of make my case for optimism in a Dame free world. And obviously we can talk a little bit, I'm sure we'll talk about a lot about that here shortly.
So 5 weeks would, based on the timeline I've kind of understood, would basically be whenever the series shifts back to Milwaukee, assuming that's like probably Thursday or Friday for game 3. And it's my understanding it's basically the first game that he missed was when he started this treatment that he had talked about the symptoms, and their medical staff had said, this doesn't line up with calf strain and all the scans and imaging that we've done. So that's why when they say we caught this early, that's what they mean. So I guess if it is, and we're just going off of what Nate Duncan had said, but if it is that 4 to 6 week timeline, you have optimism he'll be back for at least the end of this series. But yeah, I think we all agree that it's not that you can't play the way that you have had to play without Damian Lillard. Not that you can't do that once he returns, but it's not like just, okay, flip a switch and now insert Damian Lillard in place of Kevin Porter Jr. or Ryan Rollins. Like there is going to be that process to go through.
Yeah, it's not NBA 2K where you can just plug and play and you're the one controlling everything. It's one of my favorite things to think about with basketball. But I will say this, even though I'm going into this series not expecting Damian Lillard to be a part of it and just kind of saying, hey, if it happens, the positive, I will say I do feel a bit more optimistic about his possible return than I did last year with the Giannis calf situation.
Which is crazy, too, when we're talking about
a blood clot. Right. I wouldn't have expected that. But, I am a little bit more optimistic. But, again, very clear going into this Pacers series, expecting the Bucks not to have Dame.
Yeah, and I suppose it brings us to that confidence level and what, Frank, you'd kind of mentioned there. So I do want to get into that a little bit, but we got quite a few questions from the listeners, a lot of similar ones, and a lot of them kind of revolving around Damian Lillard and how this team has played without him. So we'll start to tackle the questions that you guys have for us one by one here, coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. Well, if you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about it. When was the last time you had an emergency service interruption? If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. That's why you need Open Phone. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system designed to streamline and scale your customer communications all through an app on your phone or computer. Maybe you carry 2 phones. Well, with Open Phone, you can manage business calls and texts from one app. Whether you're at your desk or on the go, you can share your inbox as well, where your team can jump into any conversation without missing a beat. And you get AI call transcripts and summaries that save you time on follow-ups and ensure you never lose track of customer interaction. Open Phone is offering our listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you're switching from another service, Open Phone will even port your existing numbers over at no extra charge. Again, to get 20% off for your first 6 months, head over to openphone.com/lockedonnba. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K services. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe, or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed as easily as you stream your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. With Wi-Fi 6, 6E, and auto low latency mode advanced technology, Fire TV Stick 4K delivers smoother, more responsive gameplay with lightning fast speeds you need to stay competitive. And with 4K streaming, you can watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and more. You can play high-quality Xbox games at a fraction of the cost on your console. Already have a console? A Fire TV Stick 4K service is more affordable and easier to travel with, allowing you to take yours or your kids' games wherever you plug in. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate Subscription compatible controller, both required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K, Fire TV Stick 4K Max, and Fire TV Cube. All right, so we kind of, Camille and I have talked about this. I don't think we've gotten your take on it, Frank, but knowing we don't know yet on Damian Lillard, and you do have Giannis, what is your level of confidence in this series?
Oh, you're on mute, Frank?
If I was going to do it by my percentage likelihood of Bucks winning versus Pacers, I would say I'm probably at like a 40% Bucks series win. I mean, it's kind of been interesting, like on Twitter, feels like Bucks Twitter is like in full,
it's like
shit talking mode. Like, like we've spent 95% of the year with people seemingly like complaining about the Bucks and everything. And then you go end the season on a winning streak and have like a week to sort of like hang out, and like everybody just starts to go into like irrational confidence mode. So, love the optimism. But I was like, literally, I was like, am I crazy? Like they're not going to be favored, are they? And
No.
I think all the sports books, have the Pacers as very solid favorites to win the series. So yeah, I mean, doesn't mean the Bucks fans should feel bad about their chances, especially, again, do you want to bet against Giannis? I'm not a betting person regardless, but like when I say 40%, it's like part of me like looks over at Giannis and thinks like, you want to bet against that guy? Like that's that's the guy I always want in my corner. And so yeah, I mean, I say that, but honestly, a lot of this is coming from the place of having watched last two springs when the Bucks went to the playoffs and were favorites and had better records than the other team and had home court advantage. And obviously Miami, there was the circumstances with the Giannis injury there, and just running into a team that obviously proved itself to be just a shockingly out of nowhere buzzsaw as an 8 seed going all the way to the finals. And then last year, obviously running into these Pacers who, to their credit, I mean, they made it to the East Finals. But there are obviously some mitigating circumstances with, not seeing Giannis at all, and Dame obviously being hobbled as well. So, I think this is a better version of the Pacers. I think Haliburton's playing better now than he was a year ago, as well as, in the fall and early parts of this season when he just didn't look like the same guy. So yeah, I mean, unfortunately you're playing the best version of the Pacers, I think, that we've probably seen over the past year. But I mean, this Bucks team, at a minimum, give them credit, right? They're not stumbling into the playoffs like they did a year ago. So even though they, I think, are at a talent deficit, I think they are a deeper team than they were a year ago. And it's interesting. I mean, and this kind of tees up obviously the Pacers kind of matchup a bit, but I mean, the thing that has, it's like a joke that I don't really mean that jokingly, but it's like, it's like, you got to win the Haliburton minutes because TJ McConnell's going to come in and like terrorize you. And, I think that was the unique thing, like in the last game, which was the one I had a chance to go to in person with my daughter. And TJ McConnell was like minus 30 something in like 18 minutes or something, whatever it was. And that was, one of those games where KPJ and that second unit like played really, really well. And ironically, a year ago, all we did was complain about the bench sucking and not scoring enough points, and the starters were dominant and all that. And this year it hasn't been like a complete reversal, but Giannis lineups have carried this team overall, and the bench, even without Giannis, even without Dame, has at least shown an ability to stay afloat, which for better or worse, they're going to have to do again in this series because, again, hopefully, obviously you need to win the Giannis minutes, but then whoever's part of those second units, like they're going to have to hold their own. And that's obviously been an area where they've struggled against Indiana in the past, but knock on wood, maybe they finally have, those combinations off the bench with, especially those guards and wings to be able to withstand, some of those Indiana runs.
Yeah, I think it's sink or swim for the Bucks bench, where it's like you don't really have an option. And to your point about the Pacers being better this year, I think it's because they're just a bit more well-rounded. Like the offense took a couple of steps back from like the historic pace that they were on last year, but their defense has been better this year. Pascal Siakam has been consistent for the Pacers throughout the year. So even with Haliburton starting the year off slow, the injuries they dealt with at certain parts of the year, Spicy P was the consistent guy for the squad throughout. And we've seen him in the playoffs as well, kind of give the Bucks problems, even when he was that third guy in Toronto, back in 2019. So Spicy P is definitely someone to keep an eye on. The TJ McConnell part is funny. I saw some stats where it was just kind of like, if Bucks fans feel like TJ McConnell seems to turn to a different guy against the Bucks, like you're not crazy. His scoring average and assist totals against the Bucks are his best numbers against any team. He also is shooting like 55% from the field, 54% from three in his career against the Bucks. So he is somebody who's definitely one of those Bucks killers off the bench for the Pacers. But to your point about just confidence levels in this team, I feel like the Knicks Piston series, like the Pistons seem to be a really trendy upset pick going on right now. And I think that if more people continue digging into this Bucks Pacers series, I think the Bucks could also be one of those trendy underdog upset picks in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I think both these teams are better and deeper than they were a year ago in this. And I mean, it goes without saying, when you got Giannis, you're obviously going to be better than you were a year ago in that series. But that is going to be probably the biggest thing for this Bucks team is you don't have Chris Middleton and his flamethrower against the Pacers in that series. But I mean, Camille, we've talked about this a lot this year. Look at the bench the Bucks played in that series against the Pacers last year, where
Danilo Gallinari,
seeing minutes, and you're going to that zone.
Real minutes.
And Jay Crowder getting minutes, and Pat Connaughton, AJ Green didn't really play much in that series. He played like 10 minutes a game or so, and it was not pretty with that second unit. So that's a big difference. But as you mentioned too, Camille, the Pacers are better, and they have other pieces there too. Benedict Mathurin wasn't in that series last year. He's healthy now. I know it's famous last words, but Frank, would the 40%, would that number change at all if this matchup changed? Like, would you be less confident against the Knicks?
Yes. Yeah. It's kind of interesting because we talk a lot about the fact that the Pacers are a bad matchup for the Bucks because of the pace and speed with which they play. But to be honest, like I feel better. And again, like, you don't want to over-index against the regular season, but like the Knicks games were so uncompetitive, and only one of them was at home, obviously. And I'm trying to remember if Dame or somebody was missing from
they
the
weren't
last
full
one.
strength, but
Brunson, Brunson and Dame, I think, were out of the last matchup between the two. Yeah. So, but that's kind of a wash. But yeah, it just felt like the Bucks just really did not have answers for Cat in the first two games. Like, it just didn't seem like the Bucks had any answers for him defensively. And then the game they contained him in, everybody else in the third game, everybody else hurt them. And it just felt like they just couldn't really slow them down, and the physicality just seemed to be a big problem. So I would have been, it's kind of interesting to me that, the Knicks, people seem to have soured on the Knicks a little bit. And, the Pistons are sort of this trendy pick because, again, like, maybe I'm clouded by, again, seeing it through the Bucks lenses, but it's like the Pistons, like, Bucks always beat the Pistons, like, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's the, G League unit with Pat Connaughton or the full strength unit or just Giannis, like, what is it, 13 straight wins or whatever it is against the Pistons, like, as much as
25 and 26 too.
Yeah, like Brook Lopez is like, 22-0 or some stupid stat or something like that. So yeah, I would have been more scared of the Knicks, I think. with the Pacers at least. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, Haliburton, I think, is so interesting to me because, again, we didn't see the full strength version of him last spring, which really was an opportunity to beat the Pacers, right? Like, he did not play particularly well in that series against the Bucks, and
didn't shoot well either.
They didn't shoot well, and Haliburton didn't play particularly well, which was really a big opportunity for the Bucks to be able to make it more competitive, than it might have otherwise been without Giannis. So I think that's been a recurring theme of a lot of the Pacer games is like the Pacers don't necessarily even shoot that well against the Bucks, and yet they can run up the score because of the way that they push the pace. So to me, it's like make them play in the half court and don't give them a lot of second chance points. Way easier said than done, but that's kind of like my those are the things I'm reaching. If I'm Doc Rivers, like we just have to get back. And I do think I think I mentioned it the other night. Like I think this is probably a series that's going to be more about Bobby Portis and Brook Lopez. And I think that's obviously partially kind of gives you some more flexibility defensively to switch, play zone, and also probably you're just more mobile getting back. And so I think that's part of it. And then obviously the defensive rebounding, which it's critical that you have not just Brook and Giannis around, and that a guy like Bobby's around. So I do think this is like a sneaky big Bobby Portis series, and obviously I think he had some fun comments today about how much this means to him, given everything he's had to go through, going back to his ejection in Game 4 or whatever that was last year in Indiana. So I think it's a really big series for Bobby in particular. Obviously Giannis is kind of the metronome of everything, but yeah, I think it's a series that to me is going to start with how the Bucks can do against that transition offense. And if you can play more half court, it doesn't mean that you're going to shut them down, because they also can kill you in half court. I think the Bucks have to show that they can not just give up dribble penetration, collapse, and give up wide open shots all day long, which we've seen at times as well.
The Pacers will also run after a make too, so the Bucks have to make sure that they're solid in that regards.
Yeah, you outshot the Pacers from I think both the floor and three in that series last year, but I didn't dig into the numbers too much. I would presume you take Chris Middleton's performance out of there and it's not quite as close. And that was the big story, is Tyrese Haliburton was pretty muted in that series, but Pascal Siakam had like 75 points in the first two games of that series. So
Myles he was threes too.
Yeah. And getting to the free throw line too.
And I should say, I mean, like if you look at the Pacers numbers this year, as much as it's felt like in Bucks games, it's been the bench, the Bucks weakness on the bench, especially last year, versus the Pacers depth and strength on the bench. I mean, you look at the Pacers like lineup numbers, like their on-off leaders are all the starters, and you look at their starting units, the two primary starting units, which have each played almost 1,000 possessions each, are both plus 12, plus 13. So in terms of this version of the Pacers, it is that if you can keep the starting unit even, that's the way that you beat them, is you play the starting unit even and you beat the bench. Obviously, the ghost of TJ McConnell or whatever, he becomes, this otherworldly scary figure when he plays the Bucks. I'm going to go ahead and say if the Pacers starters do what they've been doing all year and you can't contain TJ McConnell, it's probably going to be a much shorter series than the Bucks would like. But, again, we've seen this in the past, right? Like last year's Bucks starters were a juggernaut and then, all went out the window because of injuries and whatever else. So we'll see. Now this year, the Bucks bench is now necessarily part of their starting five because of the Dame injury. And I am curious. I think we got some questions about it, but like I am curious if Rollins. I assume Rollins will continue to start. Although the numbers with KPJ and Giannis together have been pretty incredible, especially over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, we had quite a few questions that all kind of centered around the same topic. So I do want to get to that. And one of the other somewhat updates that we got from the Bucks practice earlier today on another player and his availability for this series. So we'll get into that conversation coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. Well, when we found out Skims was making underwear for men, we were all intrigued, and we've heard so much about their quality from friends and family. It's time for us to give it a try, and we can tell you it lives up to the hype. I've always had issues with underwear, whether it be fit, comfort, or just finding the right style for me, and Skims changes all of that. Their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs to classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style. I tried the boxer briefs and I'm hooked. They're perfect for your active lifestyle. They move with you, never lose their shape, and stay in place all day. Whether you're working out or just running errands, they're the most comfortable and reliable pair of underwear you will ever own. Plus, the lightweight material feels amazing, almost like you're wearing nothing at all. Shop Skims Men's at skims.com/lockedonnba and at Skims stores. Let them know we sent you after you place your order. Select podcast in the survey and select our show in the drop-down menu that follows. Again, get them at the Skims stores or shop at skims.com/lockedonnba. So the other update of sorts we got on Jericho Sims is, I guess Doc Rivers expects him to play with the sort of answer that he gave to Eric earlier today, but that's another important piece. Certainly not. None of us are expecting Jericho Sims to be what a lot of our viewers and listeners and commenters on social media think of a 30-minute per game guy. But to give you that option too, when we mentioned, look, the Pacers are going to look to run, you need that versatility, and even mentioning the Brooker Bobby type of series, to have that versatile big that you can throw out there for who knows, whatever it is, 10 minutes or so, to give you some of that versatility. If in fact he is good to go, that should be a pretty nice boost for the Bucks.
It's nice having options. It is so nice having options for this Bucks team. As we already mentioned last year, not quite the same with your options off the bench, which I know we got a lot of lineup questions, and that's one that really stands out to me. And I'm really curious to see how Doc plays this, because Doc has talked about how he does like shorter playoff rotations, 8 guys, so to speak, but we've seen 4 key guys for this Bucks team off the bench. So that feels like it's a 9-man rotation if Ryan Rollins is still starting. You add in the fact that Jericho Sims is available for the series. And it's like, do we see Jericho Sims getting consistent minutes throughout this series, even if it is only, 10 minutes a game? Are they going to be consistent minutes, or is it really going to be one of those situations for Doc where he is just picking guys based off what that particular game needs in that moment, where it's like, hey, everybody kind of stay ready, because I'm not exactly sure what the minute allocation will look like here, but to be able to have the option of using a Jericho Sims as another big in the rotation is good for the Bucks to have the option. I'm not sure what the playing time will look like for him, but I love the fact that they'll have the option for it.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen, keep me honest here, guys, I don't think we've seen like 3 bigs playing besides Giannis with any consistency. I don't know if Jericho Sims played like non-garbage time, like in any game where Bobby and Brooke and Giannis
like
were all
one
available.
game. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm mentally prepared that, after the first 30 seconds of game 1, we'll be seeing calls for Brook Lopez to be benched for Jericho Sims.
30 seconds. Wow.
I know. I mean, I'm sure it'll start before. We probably have some questions about it already. But yeah, I mean, you can only, again, like, it's hard, right? This isn't like baseball with pinch hitters and like, National League, like the old National League rules where you're pinch hitting for pitchers and stuff like that. But like, you look at Justin, to your point, I mean, you look at the rotation, right? Again, we can talk about the starting 5, and I think probably all of us would agree, like, we would make at least one change to the starting 5. I think I won't speak for you guys, but I wouldn't start again. I don't think starting both Kuz and Taurean Prince makes sense. I think you want one other like guard type player, either GTJ or AJ Green there. That said, and I think this is probably brought up, but contrary to like what anyone would expect, the starting 5 that finished the season, which was with Ryan Rollins, Giannis, Brook Lopez, Taurean Prince, and Kyle Kuzma, was plus 13 net rating in like not a tiny amount of sample. So like, as much as everybody's like they're terrible and Bucks always lose the first quarter because of these guys, like they're outscoring teams overall by plus 13 points per 100. And even when Dame was around and you had kind of that, again, that questionable I think it was honestly, I thought it was more questionable when TP and Kuz were starting with Dame, because then that meant TP was guarding like Tyrese Haliburton and those guys.
Yeah.
That group was like +6.
Or
So
in Indiana in a game you lost in a 4-point play guarding Tyrese
yeah,
Haliburton.
yeah, exactly. So so we'll see. But yeah, I mean, you kind of just do the quick math. And Justin, I agree. Like, I mean, how you get down to 8 guys, I mean, you're gonna have to bench somebody that is playing real meaningful minutes for you, right? Like we mentioned that starting 5. And then beyond that, you've got Gary Trent Jr., he's got to play. AJ Green, he's got to play. Bobby Portis, he's got to play. And KPJ, he's got to play, you know? So that's 9 guys. So I'd fully expect to see those guys starting. And then I think, I think the question is like, are you going to see Doc kind of ride the hot hand more and lean into certain groups, which, I mean, he's done that in a number of fourth quarters late with that whole unit, right? The Giannis, AJ, Gary Trent, KPJ, and Bobby lineup. That's been kind of the closing group. And so, again, I think that'll be to watch as if that's something we see. Now, I think probably the scenario the scenario that I could certainly foresee would be if you lose both games in Indiana and you're coming home and stuff like has not been working. Yeah. Then that is where I could see Doc,
the panic lineup change.
Exactly. Like, and again, like it may be a lineup change that we're saying right now we would support, which, would be, for instance, Gary Trent for Taurean Prince or Kuz or something like that. Part of me thinks that based on the closing groups that Doc wouldn't have minded, not starting Kyle Kuzma maybe from the beginning, but because of the trade optics and all that, how much did that play into things? Who knows? But who knows? Maybe we'll just get the 22 points in 12 minutes Kuz that we saw on Sunday. Like just keep those vibes going, Kyle. Hope you didn't use up all your 3-point juice in that finale.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, Doc riding the hot hand. You failed to mention just sticking with a guy that poured in 43 points in the regular season.
That's right. I know. It's like I'm not even, like how crazy it is that like any guy could score 43 points in a regular season game, and like there'd be no question about him being out of the rotation.
Like none.
like
thank you for your service.
Like absolutely no one is like Pat Connaughton. Maybe give Pat Connaughton, like literally a guy who's won a championship. Like he's like what is Pat? Is Pat like 31, 32? Like it's not like he's ancient and he just scored 43 points and we're just like bury that guy. That guy ain't playing.
And also I do have to correct myself. There wasn't a game. So you were right with Jericho Sims, Bobby, and the other big. So I must have just been thinking about the few games where you had, holy cow, you got at least another center that you can play out there with Giannis and Brooke and Jericho Sims. But that was the bulk of the questions that we got were centered around the starting lineup here for the Bucks. And I'm not expecting it to change. And I don't think any of you guys are either, that this is what they're going with. I do think, to your point, if we get to, hey, the Bucks dropped the first 2 games of the series, and if one of those especially looks pretty bad, that's when I think you come back to Milwaukee and there is a change to the starting lineup. I don't think that would be like, unless something we don't see happening happens, I don't think that would be a like, well, we're swapping out Kevin Porter Jr. for Ryan Rollins. I think the likely candidates, you touched on them, Frank, would either be Taurean Prince or Kyle Kuzma. And just based off the minutes, I would guess it would be Kyle Kuzma, that you would just go with another guard and shift Taurean Prince to the 3. And we mentioned the names. I would still, if you do make that type of change, I think my preference would be to start AJ Green and keep Gary Trent Jr. in that role that he's really excelled in so far.
I think that makes some sense too. But if they do make a lineup change to what we've been talking about, I don't think we see a game 1. I think it would have to come later on when things happen. But the closing lineup, which is what we talk about a lot as it is, like, hey, the closing lineup matters. But for this Bucks team, they've gotten off to quite a few slow starts where I get the questions around, hey, are they going to tinker with that starting lineup at all? Because, can they get off to a faster start if, AJ Green's in the game, if Gary Trent Jr. is in there starting? But for this team in the closing lineups, like I mentioned, like I'm really curious to see what the playoff rotation looks like for the Bucks, because it's been 9 guys with Dame out that they've been counting on. So at the end of the game here, when it's down to the wire, what does that closing group look like for the Bucks? Because we've seen Doc ride, all the juniors outside of Andre with Giannis and AJ Green out there and just closing with that lineup. And it feels like they found something with that grouping. And it feels like a group that should have success against the Pacers as well. So I want to know how much that 5-man grouping is going to play together in the playoffs, and be really curious to see what those minutes continue to look like for them.
I honestly, I have no idea who I would count on closing games other than Giannis.
Consistently,
it's pretty crazy, game to game, how it could be any of the guys in that 9-man rotation could be out there with Giannis. It could be Brooke or Bobby. It could be Rollins or KPJ. It could be Gary Trent or AJ Green or both guys. It could be Taurean Prince. It feels like Kyle Kuzma is the least likely the way things have been going. Although I don't know necessarily. I think they probably like Kuzma's length and ability to switch and defend different types of guys. I'm sure they don't like, the 3-point erratic
the crunch on offense. Yeah,
exactly. And the fact that, if you're Rick Carlisle and you see Kyle Kuzma, in the corner, you're telling your team, go defend Giannis. Don't worry about it, because, it seems like Kuz actually shoots worse when he's open versus, when he's guarded, right? It's just how well he's guarded, has nothing to do with the likelihood of a shot going in, for better or worse. So yeah, I mean, it is weird. Honestly, I think the most likely guy to close other than Giannis might be AJ Green.
That feels like a safe bet.
I think the stats might actually support that.
Yeah.
And if you look at, the season plus minus numbers, AJ's it's Giannis and then AJ basically that are kind of the through lines of the most, the best Bucks lineups. So I think, and it was nice to see AJ kind of finish the season on, a strong note, doing stuff on both ends in Detroit on Friday. Obviously on Sunday he played a little bit, but obviously they didn't need him for very long. So I think that's interesting. I will say this, Justin, I will disagree in the sense of the comment you made about Rollins versus KPJ. I think honestly, if we're talking about looking ahead to game, I think we all do. Starting lineup, for better or worse, probably is what it is in game one. If they get absolutely torched and the defense is a complete wreck, maybe they could change something going into game two. But I would say you lose the first two games and then feel like you have to do something for game three move. I think putting in KPJ for Rollins is probably as likely as swapping out Kuz or Taurean, to be honest. Because honestly, Rollins is probably the guy that Doc feels the least bad about having to bench in some ways. Literally a guy that was a two-way for most of the year. And, I think, again, I think it's interesting. When I was looking at, I put on this table together that I posted on Twitter, which was sort of the Giannis effect. And it was basically every rotation guy, how they played with Giannis, without Giannis. And the interesting thing was literally everybody was negative without Giannis. And then everybody except for Ajax was positive with Giannis. And I won't hate on Ajax because I do enough of that probably. But Rollins was actually the guy who was he was a minus 0.2 without Giannis. So even though I think the logical theory is that Rollins makes sense from a balance perspective to play with Giannis, and you have Porter be more of that microwave, can create shots without Giannis guy. It's interesting looking at the data because the Rollins lineups were the best without Giannis, and KPJ had this huge boost factor with Giannis, which, I think you look at the last couple games they played together, passes the eye test a bit, some of the alley-oops, and it felt like their chemistry was improving. Again, I don't know that though over the full couple months, that it feels like KPJ was somehow unlocking Giannis or anything like that. But, it was working, and that's probably as much about the defense and offense. And, again, but is KPJ a clearly better defender than Rollins? No, I wouldn't say that. I think you could argue the reverse is true, but I think the good news is both those guys, certainly can have their moments defensively, and especially in that zone, KPJ just turns into a whole different animal. So yeah, that would be probably my other prediction, which, if we want to talk about it, but I would say I would predict the Bucks, especially whenever things don't go well, the Bucks zone will loom large and be something that Doc will probably go to quickly. I know he oftentimes early in the season talked about liking to go to in the third quarter so that other teams couldn't see it early and then prep for it. But I think,
but you can see it once in a playoff series and then
go
prep
for
it.
it.
So you got to be judicious about it. Yeah,
exactly. And I think, Justin, you talked about Tony East early in the season, talking about the Pacers sometimes struggling against zone. And so I think, like the group that we saw do unheard of things against Minnesota with that zone, probably not going to be able to replicate exactly that against the Pacers. But I think, again, just especially for me, just the fact that you can take Haliburton out of like his normal pick and roll actions through that zone, and just, again, give a lot of guys who, are used to playing fast and maybe don't want to play half court as much. That's something that, could be useful. But again, you can't, to get into that zone, you can't do it if they're running on layups and getting layups out of, dead balls and off defensive rebounds. Like, you actually have to, get back quickly and hope that they have to slow down and actually give you a chance to set up. And again, too, like, the zone can make it harder to defensive rebound because you're not kind of naturally always matched up with people, which obviously has also been a problem for the Bucks. So we'll kind of see how it goes. But yeah, I think this will be a series. Like I said, me being as big a Brook Lopez supporter as there is out there, I think, Brook has always scored well in the playoffs. I think the question is, like, do we see the situations where they can hunt him with Haliburton and pick and roll, force a lot of switches? And the more that they do that, obviously, the more that puts the Bucks in a spot where certainly Bobby is better equipped to even do those switches. And then I don't know. I mean, like, I think Jericho Sims is the best switching big of all those guys. So I think there's certainly an argument that your best defensive lineups could involve Jericho Sims. I think the issue is he's by far the worst offensive guy out of all those players. And in a series where Giannis is going to have the ball in his hands a ton of the time, and we've seen, like, in that third game in Indiana, like, the Pacers just like didn't let Giannis take shots, right? He was short of 20 is because he just couldn't get any shots. And so I think that's your concern is, especially if you have a guy like Sims, or previously it would have been Ajax, you just give them free reign to send that extra body at Giannis. And then, it's passing to a guy who, instead of Bobby Portis spotting up for a wide open three, it's, Jericho Sims at like the nail, in a 2-on-1 or something like that, which is like, okay, he's not really a lethal guy in those scenarios. So I think that's, again, I don't expect to see a lot of Jericho Sims, except, who knows, maybe in a situational type of play. But again, like, we'll see. Hopefully the starting five can do well and your bench can do well. But we know in a 7-game series, right, like, there's going to be ebbs and flows to all this.
Yeah, I don't expect the starting lineup to change, because we've heard Doc talk about it a couple of times too, that he likes those 5 guys together to start the game. If you read between the lines, we'd rather play Kyle Kuzma here than Kyle Kuzma down the stretch in meaningful minutes. And then, to the point of Rollins and Taurean Prince, he likes those 2 guys in the starting lineup because they're better spot up shooters, and you're going to get those looks with Giannis. So I agree with you overall, but I do feel like, if pressed on it, the group we've seen closing games lately, I do think that's who's going to be on the floor to close in the playoffs, because Doc has basically hinted at that a couple of times. And he kept saying, we have these analytical lineups that we really want to play more. And then once we started to see more of it, he's now expanded that to that group that we closed with. That's a great, the analytics say that's a good lineup to pair together, and we want to really lean into that. So it just kind of talks about how much this team has changed, that the one guy, Giannis is going to be closing games for you, and everything else is kind of unknown. But I do kind of feel like that's who they're going to roll with.
I think they are. Let me ask you guys this really quick, because I've been thinking about this and thinking about, I think it was the Pacers game the Bucks lost, where there felt like it was a heavy dose of Taurean Prince offensively in that game. I think it was the one he
was good, didn't he? Didn't he score a bunch? Not in like a necessarily even a bad way, but yeah.
But it was because I watched the game later, and I saw people like, man, Taurean Prince taking all these shots, and I was like, why is the ball? What is going on in this game where Taurean Prince is like the
your immediate thought wasn't it's about time?
No, that wasn't the first one. But when I watched the game, it was because the Bucks were purposely hunting out Tyrese Haliburton, trying to put him in those actions. They were hiding him on Taurean Prince, and they were using Prince to kind of get him in those actions. And when you're thinking about this Bucks offense with Giannis being the guy, the sun that everyone's orbiting around here, with this matchup, what other guys, like I mentioned Kevin Porter Jr., how important he's going to be, but if the idea is to try to get Tyrese into actions as much as possible and knowing he's going to be hitting, are there certain guys that you're thinking that we haven't talked about who are like, hey, they could be in for a, not necessarily a big series, but have an important role in this series because their offense can put some additional pressure on the Pacers and how they're trying to hide their defensive liabilities as well?
Answer what I started to think was Giannis, if he sees Myles Turner, is always going to try to get switches so he can attack Myles Turner because Myles is just too slow. And Giannis, like more so like a couple of years ago, like not this year, but last year, like I mean, I never really get too much into like individual matchup stats, but like it was just, you know, like corporal punishment what he did to Myles Turner. Like he just destroyed him, attacking him, going to the basket. And again, like you think of it as like, oh, well, Myles Turner is like their best shot blocker. Like, why would you want to attack that? But it's like, he's not trying to like let Myles Turner stand at the basket and dunk on him. He's trying to get him, 18 feet from the basket and then using that quickness, spin moves, all that. And, worst case scenario, you put him into foul trouble in that case. So I think, from a Giannis perspective, I think it'll be interesting to see, like, we've seen Indiana go from extremes of like, we've seen him at various points, like they put Turner on him. Obviously, Siakam is kind of the natural one-on-one matchup, but we've also seen them put Aaron Nesmith on Giannis a fair bit because Nesmith will just like hand-to-hand combat, just like fight Giannis and dare the officials to call a foul. And Giannis typically like gets close to fouling him out. I think was what we've seen. He missed, I think, the first two matchups this year. But we've seen Nesmith. We've seen him have some big scoring games, but we've also seen him, I think, be able to like deny and pressure the ball. And so I think when you look at like the secret to the Pacers when they play good defense, it's because they pressure really well on the perimeter. And I think with Giannis, if Giannis expects that he's going to be able to initiate offense, I think they're going to put a lot of Nesmith on him and basically just harass him and potentially send, second guys, et cetera, really far from the basket. So that, again, if he's like posting up Aaron Nesmith, facing him up 10 feet away, of course, that's a huge advantage for Giannis. But I think the Bucks are going to have to figure out different ways that they can get Giannis the ball other than just thinking he's going to be able to dribble up and, run inverted pick and rolls all game long. Because I think the Pacers are just going to say like, we're just going to take the ball out of your hands and, Bobby Portis, Brook Lopez, whoever else, like hit some threes, right? Like you said with Taurean Prince. Okay, dribble handoff Taurean Prince. We're going to let you, basically drive to the middle and shoot effectively a layup rather than, be able to throw Giannis a lob or whatever it is. So that's the part I'm really curious to see. Like, can the Bucks manufacture and get Giannis the ability to get downhill and get shots? Because the one game where Giannis was not great this year, it was because he just couldn't take any shots. It was in that third game. They just really denied him opportunities.
Yeah, it's going to be one of the interesting things to monitor here for this series is how do the Pacers go at Giannis here? Do we see the same thing of make his teammates hit shots? We're taking the ball, especially with no Dame to start the series. I would imagine that's going to be the case. And what are the looks? I think the last game, that one loss, there was a pretty heavy amount of Pascal Siakam on Giannis with Nesmith second there, but how much of that translates over into the playoffs, we shall see. And now we just kind of wait to see what other updates we get between now and this series beginning on the status of Damian Lillard and then the verification on Jericho Sims as well. But still a couple of days before this series starts, a lot more to pour over. There's a couple of unanswered questions that we'll get to here throughout the course of the week. But a lot of the gist of the questions that we got were, what's the role for Jericho Sims? Do you change the starting lineup, or who closes games for the Bucks? So the others outside of that we'll get to here in the next couple of days. We're going to have a crossover with Tony East as well to get his perspective on the Pacers. That'll come your way, I believe, Thursday as we move closer and closer to the postseason being here, and hopefully the first time in 3 years the Bucks get out of the first round of the playoffs. That'll do it for today's show. For Frank and Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.